These are all of the books that I've read this year so far. Let's talk about them. So let's go over every book I read in January, February, and March of 2026. I didn't really set any reading goals for myself this year. I am just going where the wind takes me. I'm reading books for book clubs, I'm reading books for me, and that's it. I also have severely slowed down my book buying. Unless I am intending to buy something or I plan to buy it, like it's a new release that I'm anticipating, or I'm on a trip and I want to get a little bookish souvenir, so I've allotted myself a book purchase on that trip, I'm not buying the book. As a bookish creator, I'm very fortunate that sometimes I can access ARCs or I get free copies sent to me. But outside of that, I am using the library, I am using Libby, I am getting my mileage out of my e-reader, and it's been really nice. It's been nice to not have the pressure to physically have every single book that I read as a trophy. I have enough. That being said, I do love being able to physically hold up a book in a video, so when I have it, I will be showing it off. The very first book I read in 2025 was The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book is the blueprint for dark academia. It is so interesting to read a book that inspired so many pieces of media that I love and an aesthetic that has taken TikTok by storm. At its core though, it is like a reverse whodunit mystery about beautiful people behaving very badly. It also did trigger a bit of an existential crisis about why I love to romanticize the very thing that this book serves to criticize. The Bookleo has a really interesting video essay about this very concept. I highly recommend you check it out if that's interesting to you at all. I'm so glad I finally read this, even if only to appreciate its cultural and literary impact. The dark academia aesthetic unfolds in real time. The cloistered campus, the classics, this intoxicating little cult of beautiful people with way too much ego and way too much money being evil. The Secret History is inarguably seminal, and so many of my favorite works are made to be in conversation with it. And Donna Tartt's writing is beautiful, albeit very difficult at times. This book is very clearly interested in criticizing the glamour of the very world that we're inside of. The privilege, the aesthetic obsession, intellectual posturing, the delusion that beauty can justify anything. And yet it's so seductive that you find yourself as the reader like wanting in anyway, which is of course also the point. There are a lot of stretches in the middle of this book especially where that spell sort of thins a little and it really loses momentum. But I really get it now. I really get why it is such an important modern classic and why it is a fundamental keystone in its genre. Next up, I read Half His Age by Jennette McCurdy. This book is tackling the brutal violence of teenage girlhood. And much like Jennette's memoir, this novel was a really hard read. It's a Lolita-style story, but from the POV of Lolita. It follows a 17-year-old who becomes obsessed with her high school creative writing teacher, and Jennette McCurdy refuses to soften a single edge of what that looks like from the inside. After reading two of her books, I am really interested to see where Jennette McCurdy goes next. I do think that her memoir was much stronger than this because it had the benefit of hindsight, of being able to look back as an adult and be inside of the story from an older perspective. And unfortunately, her writing as a 17-year-old, but with that same sort of tone, didn't quite mesh because this 17-year-old was brutally self-aware to the point that it felt like I was reading from the perspective of a 30-something who had been therapized. And while I think she did a really good job of capturing that not all predators look like monsters, sometimes they just look like sad men who are desperate to be desired, I think that this character's interiority didn't feel very real to me, if that makes sense. Jennette McCurdy's prose is very simple and staccato, but it does cut, and I think it is very precise, and I'm really interested to see where she goes next in her writing career. If you're particularly interested in Jennette McCurdy's perspective on desire and hunger and consumption, this would be very interesting for you, but I don't think it held a candle to books like My Dark Vanessa, for instance. I also listened to the audiobook, which is the same format that I consumed I'm Glad My Mom Died, and both of them have the same sort of tone and feeling and voice, so sometimes it was really hard for me to extricate her novel from her memoir, but she is a very talented voice actress, and it was really interesting to hear her performance of both of them. Next, I read Say It Out Loud, and this did not work for me. This was very much like Twilight copy-paste nostalgia. And it is a premise that I should have loved. This is about a washed up millennial podcaster who is obsessed with this fandom. It's got fake dating. It's set in like an audio recording studio where they're doing a dramatic audio version of this vampire romance series. It's a second chance romance. It's about art and love and finding yourself in your career. On paper, that's pretty great, but the execution fell very flat. I have this beef with contemporary romance where so many of them, you could just take the main male character, the love interest, out, and you could replace him with anyone, or you could just not have him, and it would be a fun, interesting little lit fic book. And that to me means that it's not succeeding as a romance. Half of the romantic interest in this book could have not existed, and this book wouldn't be any worse. There was no spark, there was no chemistry. He just served as a mirror to like a fictional love interest from a fandom, and that's not a good enough reason to fall in love for me. I also love the idea of digging into fandom. People clinging to fandom for the meaning, or maybe as a scaffolding for something important in their lives. Like, this could have been a really cool book about what fandom is and what fandom means, but it just didn't work. It didn't go there. It didn't dig in. It's just references and vibes and not like the real joy and the real community that fandom could actually provide. But the worst part of this book is that it commits the cardinal sin of being boring. This is a story about passion rather than one that has any. And for a romance that's rooted in something as pure and beautiful and exciting as fandom, that's an unforgivable crime to me. Don't worry though, because Sarah Hogle saved the day with You Deserve Each Other. This was my first 5-star of the year, and do not judge this book by its cover. This is amazing. I think I am in the middle of a romance identity crisis where I just need characters to feel real, to feel messy, or for it to be deeply fun and unserious. This one falls into the first camp. These characters are calcified with resentment, and never did I think I would say I love a romance that is overflowing with deep resentment and loathing. But this one really worked for me. I love fresh love, obviously. I love romance. It is one of my most read genres. But there is something so satisfying about watching real feeling characters who are snowballing in anger and pain with real history and an entire emotional landfill in between them, still somehow working and clawing to find their way back to each other. On top of that, this book is wickedly funny. The premise is that we have an engaged couple that got engaged way too soon and they regret it. They don't want to get married. But the one that calls it off has to incur the cost of calling off the wedding. So they are constantly trying to make each other's life miserable so that the other person will be the one that does it. And let me tell you, the pettiness is Olympic level unhinged. And underneath all that chaos, it has real teeth. I think it is so genuinely impressive that this author shows you two people who are at their worst and still genuinely makes you root for them to be together. So give me resentment in romances that is so calcified it has to be extracted with explosives. This was deeply sad, extremely moving, and very funny all at the same time. It made me cry big, fat, continuous tears for almost the entire third of this book. This book made me cry real, continuous tears for like the entire back third. On a plane in the middle of the night. This is what I looked like. And people were turning around 180 degrees in their seat to look at me because they wanted to know what the hell was going on. Sarah Hogle, that's what was going on. This book was incredible. If you are a romance reader, please pick this up. It really worked for me. Next up, I read Seduction Theory, and I'm dying to know who the MFA student is that hurt this author. Seduction Theory is a short, very sharp little satire that is about authorship and power dynamics told through the lens of academia's favorite pastime. Self-serious people who are making terrible decisions. It has this like thesis framing device that is incredibly clever, and the book is doing something very interesting that is also very exhausting. Overall, I think the writing in this is the best part. If you like the idea of reading something that is making fun of academia, that is also like deeply self-aware of its own performance, then I think you would really like this. It is basically just a satire of academia dressed up as a story about infidelity. Our narrator thinks that turning people into material is a kind of intimacy. Everyone here is deeply deeply unbearable in a very intentional way. It's very petty and voyeuristic and annoyingly quite compelling. I loved how you're never fully sure whether you're reading the truth, a projection, a fantasy, or self-justification. But where it wobbles for me is the payoff. Like a lot of academic lit fic, this is a lot more focused on its own structure than it is like catharsis or payoff of any kind. Sometimes that distance feels like the point, and sometimes it kind of just feels like a cop-out. I just kind of kept waiting for something sharper to sort of cut through the artifice. That said, it is smart enough to stop before it overstays its welcome. I think the length is perfect. Another 100 pages of this probably would have ended me. At this length, it is a tight little story that did not linger too long. Do we need another book about privileged white people having affairs? Probably not. But when it's this self-aware, this strange, and this committed to the bit, I'm willing to watch them spiral anyway. I'm currently watching Rooster on HBO, and that show is giving me what I wish this book had given me. Next, I read Dungeon Crawler Carl 1 and 2. The second one is called Carl's Doomsday Scenario, and I read them sort of back to back as a unit, so that's how I will recap them and review them. I put off reading these, even though everyone and their cat told me to read them, because they look like boy books. Forgetting once again that I really like boy books, and I had a blast. They were right. Everyone is right about these books. They are so fun, and they are so funny, and they are a great time. Everyone is right. They are extremely entertaining, they are incredibly funny, and genuinely delightful. The premise alone is so incredible. Carl is in his underwear, chasing his cheating ex-girlfriend's Persian show cat, Princess Donut, while wearing said ex-girlfriend's Crocs when the apocalypse happens. From there, aliens turn Earth into a televised dungeon crawl for intergalactic entertainment. Survivors are forced to fight their way floor by floor while the entire galaxy watches and places bets and demands entertainment. This series is unbelievably fun and silly and unserious, but it does actually have substance. Underneath the relentless stream of jokes and carnage, there's like a pulse. The horror of turning suffering into content. The stubborn insistence on trying to remain humane and human in a system that demands and rewards cruelty. I suspect that later books will actually have something to say. Also, lit RPG fantasy sounds incredibly niche. It sounds like you have to have played like 12 D&D campaigns or like know what min-maxing is to really enjoy it. Not the case. I think any experience playing games or RPGs will enhance the time you have reading this book because it does lean very heavily into mechanics. It is not necessary though. I think the books do a great job of explaining what you need to know to any audience, and the real hook is the pacing, the absurdity, the set pieces, and the characters. I'm also really glad I read these back to back because it does feel like a direct continuation between book 1 and book 2, and I get the sense that the rest are like that as well. It just goes straight into the next book with the exact same momentum, the same unhinged energy, but with the stakes getting higher and higher. I cannot believe I'm going to read 6 more of these. Because I absolutely have to. I went on an insane reading run because the next book was my favorite book of the year so far. One of my favorite books of all time. The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. Everyone was right about this book, and you should listen to them. This is the closest thing I have read to perfection in such a long time. This is the kind of book that feels monumental and deeply intimate, like a legend whispered underneath your skin. Una Everlasting is this incredible lady knight. I mean, yeah. She is the national hero of the nation of Dominion. She's an orphan who became a knight, who became a symbol, who died for queen and country. We also have Owen Mallory, who is this cowardly little historian, the scholar, and he is in love with her story. And through a series of hijinks, he gets sent back in time into a series of time loops to make sure and ensure that her story happens the way that it should, which means watching her die over and over and over again in the most beautiful series of time loops that I've ever read. This is a story about stories and about turning those stories into weapons. It's about who gets mythologized and who gets erased. It's also about what a nation demands of the people that it turns into propaganda. It's about war and glory and the machinery of patriotism and nationalism and the wheel of the empire and the cost of that empire and the question of who must die to keep that wheel turning. It's also about two people choosing each other in a world that tells them they can't. Oh, the romance. The romance is agonizing in the best way. If you want yearning, if you want pure, painful pining, look no further. If you want unbridled, pathetic devotion, this is for you. It's so delicious, I could sink my teeth into it. An anxious historian whose devotion is so intense it turns into a holy vocation. A tall, broad-shouldered lady knight that you will want to worship too. Time loops, myth-making, the unbearable ache of trying to rewrite the ending that you already know. And Harrow's prose is unreal, lyrical, breathtaking, devastating. 5 stars, no notes. This is a perfect book for me. Okay, I have officially embarked on my Regency romance education. Determined to try everything, I consulted the experts in my friend group to build me a syllabus. This is where they recommended I start. The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. And the premise is so silly. A vicar's daughter turned seamstress storms into the Duke's library wearing the wedding dress of the now cancelled engagement, demanding payment for her services. The Duke of Ashbury, freshly returned from war, convinced he is a hideous and unlovable monster, decides on the spot that she will do nicely for his wife. And what surprised me the most was how funny this is. The banter is sharp and sarcastic and charming. The Duke is so dramatic in his theatrical self-pity, and she refuses to indulge that for even a second. Underneath all the comedy though, this book is actually grappling with shame and negotiating what it means to be ruined in a society that is so obsessed with surfaces. And here is my half-baked, not yet fully formed thesis. I think that well-done Regency romance might actually interrogate gender and power dynamics better than most contemporary does. In a historical setting, those constraints are extremely explicit. So the author is forced to confront that system rather than pretend it isn't there. Granted, I am on a very curated path of Regency romance. I think I'm reading really good finds that my friends know will resonate with me. But just think about it. Percolate on it. Go out there into the world and let me know if you think there's anything to it. Anyway, the Duchess Deal was a really fun time. I think it was exactly what I needed. Consider me officially enrolled in the course. I then read Heap Earth Upon It by Chloe Michelle Haworth. This is an Irish author, and her book Sunburn, which I believe is her debut, was one of my top books of 2025. I loved Sunburn. And what I have deduced is that Chloe Michelle Haworth has this uncanny ability to write this very specific flavor of desire. It is both ravenous and self-loathing, and it's very Irish, and I love it. This book is set in 1965 in rural Ireland, and it is all about atmosphere. It is shrouded in mystery. It's gothic. It's suffocating. It's almost claustrophobic. There's a character in this book who is obsessed with the women she admires so much that she's not sure if she's in love with them or she wants to be them. This book is a mystery, and it did stall and drag at times. It is trying to drip feed you some hints from the past, which makes the unraveling sort of feel inevitable, but at the cost of losing a lot of momentum. Even still, I really enjoy the slow rot of the mystery. She writes obsession and repression as two sides of the same coin with surgical precision. Even though this one was not nearly as perfect as Sunburn was, it was like unmistakably hers, and I will be watching what she does next. Next up, I read An Academic Affair, which is an Australian contemporary romance. This is the marriage of convenience trope, but because they're partner hires. I don't know a lot about how the academic system works, but I don't think that this is how partner hires work. Basically, these two academic rivals have been circling each other's orbit for some time now, and they also happen to be roommates. And when a coveted position opens up, they both need it for very real reasons. And when they notice that there's a partner hire clause on the contract, They think what any normal person would think, which is, what if we just got married? Obviously. There was a lot of like slice of life sort of moments that made the romance feel genuinely quite earned. It's very sweet and brainy, and the first half of the book has like footnotes, and that's a really cute touch. I really enjoyed their genuine real friendship and the domestic montages, and ultimately this was just really sweet. I don't have much else to say about it. Next up, I read Lullabies for Little Criminals, and I have decided I'm going to read her entire back catalog because this is unreal. Lullabies for Little Criminals follows Baby, who is a young girl growing up in Montreal with a father who is spectacularly unequipped to be anyone's parent. The world around her keeps dragging her to dangers far before she is ready. Baby is our narrator, and she is very observant and tender, but because she is still a child, she doesn't always understand the full shape of the danger around her. The book does, and you as the reader do, and that gap is where the heartbreak is potent. There's also something that's like fairy tale-like about the prose, which makes it hit even harder. Heather O'Neill manages to write about squalor and exploitation and neglect and crime and grime with this strange sort of glittering beauty, and it captures the way that a child might find oddness and wonder inside of it. It's a very bleak tale about the scraps of magic and tenderness that a kid might cling to because she has nobody to protect her. It is a story about stolen childhood that will steal your heart, a coming-of-age story about neglect and survivorhood, and she renders a grimy, feral Montreal with aching beauty. I want to read every single word that Heather O'Neill has ever written. 5 out of 5 stars. Incredible. Next, I read a romance novella, a nice short little snippet called Rooting Interests. We follow a sports journalist who gets pulled off of her usual NFL beat to cover a WNBA All-Star weekend. There, she ends up circling, professionally and personally, the star WNBA athlete. It's a WNBA romance between two very competent professionals, a journalist and a player. What I liked most is that this book really deeply understands performance, ambition, and the specific intensity of women who are deeply committed to their work. They already mostly know who they are. The tension comes from them trying to figure out if there is room for desire inside of lives that are mostly full. Outside of just the press room friction, I really enjoyed the journalist angle. It plays with media coverage and performance pressure and journalism ethics, and all of that really worked for me. This is marketed as a novella, and I do think that means it also suffers from a little bit of a rushed ending and not enough character development. I needed at least 50 more pages to really feast on the growth of these characters. I think it's possible in a small package, but this one in particular just needed a little bit more breathing room, in my opinion. Still though, this was cute and thoughtful and genuinely lovely. I am always here for a sapphic romance, a sapphic sports romance. Let's go lesbians. Next up is an eerie Irish folk horror novel, Knock Knock Open Wide. I've been kind of light on horror this year, but this one was a really strong opener. It's got changelings and curses and ancient things in the soil and a very unsettling, creepy, disturbing children's TV show that is haunted. There's generational trauma and lots of secrets, and also theater kids. I don't know what's scarier than that. Now, I can't believe I unintentionally read 2 sapphic gothic mysteries set in rural Ireland in a single month, but honestly, I'm not mad about it. Now, this book braids 2 timelines together, and at the center is this creepy, haunted children's TV show, and everyone in Ireland seems to remember it a little bit differently. The folklore elements here are fantastic. It made me want to learn more about Irish folk legends and lore. This book pulls from Irish myths and also Catholic anxiety. Got that in spades. But there's a very real sense of this like ancient creeping horror. There are multiple timelines and several perspectives and this very slow unraveling mystery. Sometimes I think that complexity gets more than a little too tangled, but I found the atmosphere and the ideas so compelling that I didn't really mind the messiness. It's full of creepy, strange, historic dread, and also messy university theater lesbians. What's not to love? I had a great time. Covering 3 months in one video? Whew. We're like halfway through, but I had to take a break. Continuing my Regency romance education, Tessa Dare Lesson 2. I read The Governess Game, and it did take me a while to buy into this couple. In fact, it almost took me as long as it took the heroine to realize that the hero has been unwaveringly in awe of her for the entire book. Once I realized that though, it clicked, and it worked for me. This follows an accidental governess who is forced to manage two feral little orphan girls, and of course a rakish duke who is completely undone by a woman who he respects. The kids in this book completely steal the show. They hold these bizarre nightly doll funerals that should not be as funny as they are. And watching this governess slowly build trust with these two neglected orphan girls is somehow the best part of this book. Our MMC seems to be a very classic historical romance rake who believes himself incapable of love and must be convinced otherwise. I did find his emotional resistance to be quite repetitive at times, but I came around eventually. Then I had quite the pivot for Son of the Morning by Akwaeke Emezi. The main love interest in this is Lucifer, like the actual devil, and there's a bonus because it's a why choose romance. There's heaven and hell politics colliding with normal daily life, plus literal angels and demons. And I think Akwaeke Emezi does something really impressive here. This is a big operatic cinematic concept in a very tight, short, single standalone. I do think we need a second of commotion for this cover. This is my first Why Choose Romance, and I think that this packaging is so fun. Galilee Kincaid has always known she's different. She's been raised among a powerful clan of women who guard their land and their secrets. When she meets Lucifer, currently posing as security for a mysterious artifact, things quickly escalate into, let's just call it, divine chaos. And I do mean quickly. While it is a tight standalone, the timeline here is extremely compressed. The insta-love is a little eye-roll inspiring. Characters here are ready to burn down heaven, earth, and hell for each other in what feels like roughly 20 minutes. But if you just accept the paranormal logic of it all, this becomes a blast and a half. In every book of theirs so far, they use sharp, gorgeous, lush prose to render this beauty and decadence. And that quality works especially well here because it makes it feel like this supernatural fever dream. I also appreciated how queer and playful this book is with mythology and romance dynamics. Frankly, I need more Why Choose books in my life because this was wildly fun. If you can't tell, I am starting to get a little bit fatigued with the sea of same straight contemporary romances. I'm craving more romances with mess or things that are just really outside the box, things that are wild. So when my romance book club selected Morning Glory Milking Farm, I knew I would get exactly what I was looking for. If you haven't read this, proceed with caution. I'm about to say some cursed words that don't belong in the order that I'm about to say them in. It's a bizarrely charming book in a world where the mythical creatures are very hands-on. Violet is a down-on-her-luck millennial who is thrown into a job where she is milking minotaurs for pharmaceutical reasons. And by milking, I don't mean dairy. She gets full-time pay, she gets full benefits, including dental, and no experience is required. Except for the minor detail where she has to extract fluids from massive beasts. You're thinking, that sounds weird. And you're right, it's weird. It is so detailed to a level that had me questioning all of my life choices that got me here to this point. But it was also fun. The sheer audacity had me flipping the pages faster than I could even process the absurdity. Between the volume of fluids, there's like a genuine heart to this story. I can't believe I'm saying this. The world building is delightfully bizarre. It makes zero sense, but somehow it kind of lands. Personally, I am seeking an unrepentantly silly time at book club with my friends. I don't know if I would have picked this up solo on my own if it hadn't been like in community with others. But I'm glad I did. And if you're looking for a book that makes zero sense on paper, but kind of works, or you're looking to giggle in a group of girlies, Morning Glory Milking Farm is a monster romance like none that I have ever read. Dare I say it is an unexpected commentary on capitalism. There's not much else to say about this. It is exactly what you think it is. For quite a big tonal shift, I then picked up Whidbey. So I've never read this author's memoir, but my understanding is that memoir really grapples with an assault that she experienced. And apparently in real life, she was on a ferry on a trip to Whidbey Island and some stranger came up to her and he asked her why she looked so sad, and she thought, what the hell, and told him about her assault. And apparently in conversation he jokingly was like, you want me to kill him? And of course she just laughed it off, because what are you supposed to do in a social scenario like that? And apparently that concept inspired the idea for this novel. And let me tell you, it's bizarre. It is like a slow burn literary exploration about the aftermath of violence. And it's set in this eerie Pacific Northwest atmosphere. For a lot of the book, you are isolated on this small island of Whidbey. This is kind of being marketed as a thriller, and I don't think that's a fair representation of what this book is. It's really a literary character study that happens to have a murder at its center. So we follow these three women who all have their entire life shaped by the same man. First, we have Birdie, who is trying to escape her trauma by going to this island. Then we have another survivor of this man who has written a best-selling memoir, and we also follow the perpetrator's mother. She is forced to confront the reality of what her son has done, and for me this was by far the most interesting POV, without a doubt. This author is not interested in like an easy moral architecture. She's interested more in the ripples and aftershocks of harm. Who gets to tell their story? Who gets believed? Who gets exploited? And this is the messiness of survival. All of these perspectives sit beside each other without any single person having the real full story. And everyone is trying to make sense of something that refuses to resolve cleanly. This is not a propulsive, twisty thriller so much as it is an examination of what the long shadow of trauma and justice really looks like. This was really unforgettable. This was really thoughtful, and it made me extremely curious to read more from this author and also to see what they're gonna do next. That was everything I read in January and February, and from here on out, this is everything I read in the month of March. The first book I read in the month of March was Open Throat, and this is a bizarre, tiny little book, and I really loved it. It's written in short, stanza-like bursts from the perspective of a queer mountain lion living in the hills above LA, watching humans with this mix of fascination, disgust, tenderness, and hunger. For such a tiny little book from the perspective of an animal, this had a lot to say about humanity. In very few words, it explores loneliness, isolation, and hunger. There's something so smart about using a not quite human narrator to expose how cruel and absurd humans really are. It's just a tiny portrait of living in scarcity. It's quick, it was strange, it was weirdly moving, it's very existential and a little mournful, and it really worked for me. Then I read Violet Thistlewaite is Not a Villain Anymore, and I don't have much to say about this because there's not that much to it. It was fine. This is marketed as cozy. This character is a former war criminal. She's a dark witch who decides to open a flower shop, shed her old life, and try to be good. And then also fall in love. There was an opening scene that was kind of a banger. Like, she's this blood splattered baddie, and I thought that maybe she is a villain. But for me, that was where it peaked. If a cute small town setting is enough to do it for you, maybe this would work for you, but it wasn't enough to carry it for me. I wanted her to like really grapple with it. Instead, she's just kind of whiny and self-loathing and kind of dumb. She's supposed to have this grumpy counterpart love interest, and I think he's supposed to be sort of an emotional anchor, but for me, the chemistry was not convincing, the connection felt very underdeveloped, and at no point did I actually feel like the story needed the MMC. And like we covered earlier, I think that's a fatal flaw in a romance. I kept thinking about how much stronger this would have been if it fully committed to Violet's villain arc. What's interesting here is her guilt and her growth and her strange little plants. Her past life catching up to her. That's the interesting part of this book. I don't have much bad to say about this book because I don't have much to say about this book at all. Next, I have Graceless Heart by Isabel Cañas, and look how gorgeous this book is. And equally gorgeous is the setting of this book. Renaissance era Florence, Italy. Streets that feel alive. I loved the concept and the atmosphere, and our main character had a really compelling drive. There was gorgeous, sharp writing that really brings this beautiful, dazzling world to life. However, I do think this book might be suffering a little bit from the TikTokification of romantasy. I don't think this book needed to be a romance. There is this Twilight-esque, really clunky love story, and then there's also like fantasy elements that feel very hand-wavy, and I think if this had really committed to being a compelling historical fiction novel, and not a romantasy, or maybe like one or the other, but not both. The romance itself felt very YA, and I love YA, but considering the stakes of the story and the age of our character, it didn't really match. I think the main character's arc would have been so fascinating if it had relied on her and not a main male love interest. I assume this like romantasy veneer is sort of applied to this in order to appeal and market it to the masses. But beneath that veneer, I think there's a historical fiction that really sparkles. But beneath that veneer, there's this historical fiction novel that really sparkles. Ultimately, I liked it but didn't love it, and I would be curious to see more from this author. Next, I read Artwork by Sally Mann, and this may be my first nonfiction of the year. This is a really delightfully candid memoir from a photographer that is full of photos. This book left me thinking differently about making, looking, and living with art. It's full of stories, insight, and encouragement, but never in a way that tries to pin the author or the reader down. It's stuffed with thoughtful reflections on a life fully lived in art, creativity unpacked with candor, with warmth, and with insight, and inspiration that honors every artist's individuality. I closed this feeling really inspired, wanting to explore more of Sally Mann's art, and also wanting to notice my own messy process along the way. I had a really good time with this book, and now I find myself quite fond of Sally Mann. I'm somebody who journaling and physically writing things down is such a big part of my life. This really reinforced that and really made me think a little bit more about how that in and of itself is its own art form and its own ode to the artist experience. I really loved this. This is not something that I typically would have reached for, but I'm so glad I did. Next, I read this poetry collection by Marie Howe called What the Living Do. I've been wanting to read more poetry, and this one was pretty special. It's explorations of grief, memory, or the small but profound acts of living. A lot of the poems in here are about ordinary life, but also extraordinary loss. They move with the rhythm of memory and childhood and family and love, always circling the author's sadness of losing her brother to AIDS. I find her language to be very simple and direct, but still deeply intimate. I found that the poems in here that impacted me the most are the ones that sort of inhibit the space between sorrow and everyday moments in life. I really appreciate poetry collections like these that feel like you are walking through somebody else's memory, but they also feel deeply intimate. Those are the kind of poems that help you to remember to truly, fully live in the moment. Next, I read The Ex-Perimento. This is a very sweet celebrity romance set in Venezuela. It's a rom-com that I found very light on the calm. There was a lot of secondhand embarrassment. Maybe that was supposed to be the calm. And a lot of the times I just kept thinking, like, at your big age, what are you doing? You should know better by now. What I loved most about this was the setting of Caracas. It is so beautiful and bright and full of macaws and music and culture. The way our main character, Marianto, adores the city made her reflections and her adventures feel very personal and immersive. While the men she encountered could have been interchangeable, I really did appreciate that this centered a lot on her personal growth and self-actualization. And I think that made the story feel really heartfelt, and ultimately it landed. For another whiplash, major tonal shift on this roller coaster, No Matter What by Cara Bastone, another 5-star banger. Cara Bastone is the queen of writing messy characters that you're not sure should be in love. When I say I want more heart, more mess, more emotional nuance in a sea of same, of contemporary blah, this is what I mean. Roz and Vin's marriage was shattered by a tragic accident, and every interaction since then feels like walking on fragile glass. This is a tender, raw, slow burn about healing set in New York City with art and self-discovery woven into real, messy life. It's a marriage in crisis story that does not sugarcoat the hard stuff. It's about patience and presence and the small ways that we consistently show up for the people we love. Miscommunication is central here, and that can be deeply frustrating, but for me, that also made it feel so much more real. When these characters finally see each other again, it's so worth it. Once again, Cara Bastone nails emotional nuance, the slow build, and the beauty of flawed, determined love. This is also a lovely ode to art as a part of therapy and healing and community, and it made me want to sign up for figure drawing lessons. Who wants to sign up for a class with me? Next, I read The Correspondent, and the hype is right. This book is beautiful. Think along the lines of Anne Patchett. It is a tender, lovely, gorgeous character study. It made me want to send letters, hug my loved ones, cry, and read more. Sybil, our main character, is 73, fiercely independent, and has a pen sharper than most people's tongues. I kind of want to be her when I grow up. Every day, Sybil writes letters to family members, to loved ones, to authors, to friends, even people that are complete strangers. Through these letters, this is an epistolary novel, we see a life unfold. It's full of love, loss, and quiet reflection. There's this push and pull between Sybil's pride and her vulnerability, and it runs through the entire story in such a beautiful vein. Sybil can be frustrating. At times she is like painfully human and self-centered, and I love her. I want to read more books about septuagenarians. By the end, you'll be thinking about your own connections and the people who shaped you and the letters you want to send and how you're going to be spending the winter years of your life. The Correspondent reminded me that epistolary novels, when done well, are a uniquely immersive and tender thing. I loved these reflections on grief and loss and life, all told with wit and candor. If you love the idea of reading a gorgeous portrait about a woman who is stubborn and flawed and unforgettable, pick this one up. Next up, I read Abby Jimenez's most recent release, The Night We Met. Abby Jimenez, to me, does such great setups for romance. All of her setups are funny, original, and deeply committed to a punchline. But there's always heaps and heaps of trauma and sad stuff that affects every single character, and they rarely have to grapple with it. I think she did a really good job in Say You'll Remember Me. I think it did this really well. The characters actually have to grapple with conflict. The conflict is largely external, but still, it had a lot of payoff. This one is this messy romance that explores the like right person, wrong time trope. There's emotional cheating and this sort of like messy love triangle, and I think it was really close. And I had a lot of fun, and I didn't want to put it down, but it didn't quite hit for me. The FMC here is so hopelessly dependent on the men in her life. Abby can write a man who is down bad, pathetic, yearning, pining, and I love that. But that's about all there is to him. He is so perfect that he's kind of boring, dare I say. He has all this trauma that he doesn't really have to confront. He's just a little brooding until the right girl comes along, and then it's made him perfectly empathetic. I think I've just been reading too many good, like, messy romances that handle that mess well. Hello, Sarah Hogle and Cara Bastone. Other than one character that explored medication for depression, nobody's going to therapy for like serious familial parental induced trauma. However, I had a lot of fun reading this. I never once wanted to put it down. I was immersed the whole time. There are a lot of wildlife encounters, like a surprising amount for the genre of book that it is. There is a feral Yorkie that is somehow the sanest character. It's just that by the end, when it wrapped up in this perfect, clean, neat little bow, I kind of felt like left wanting a little more. Abby Jimenez is so hit and miss for me, but people are ride or die for her books. So I will keep reading the books that this woman types out on her iPhone because I can't help it. There's only 2 more books to talk about, and I own both of them, but I don't know where they are. I only found one of them, which is why owning this many books is silly. I don't know where all my books are. I finally read The Will of the Many. This is a sprawling Roman-inspired fantasy that blends magic, intrigue, and a touch of a magic school. This world is terrifyingly structured. The concept is that every single like feudalistic level of power funnels more and more will or life force into the greater position above it. So it's like a really big magic-based pyramid scheme empire. And our main character is this protagonist who you can't help but root for. He is a little bit like overly competent, think like Kavoth or Darrow, but he's still very flawed and stubborn and fiery, but I was invested in his journey and what motivates him from day one. This book is also extremely ambitious. Part 1 sets up this like very meticulous foundation. Part 2 immerses you in like a magical academy. And Part 3 has this exciting propulsive climax with all this violence and exciting big revelations. It's very complex, but I think the pacing doesn't really falter. And I got to the end thinking, okay, I've had enough. I don't think I need to keep reading this series. And then I read the epilogue, and it made me question that immediately. There's a lot of layered conspiracies and not sure who you can trust at every turn. Multiple complex characters fighting against oppressive systems. I don't think this book passes the Bechdel test, but I do think it succeeds at achieving something very impressive. This is the kind of story that has rich world building, inventive action sequences, and it really rewards paying attention. The jury is still out on if I will pick up book 2. A lot of people claim that it is also really good. We'll see. And the last book that I have to wrap up for March for this quarter of reading so far is Mary by Nat Cassidy. This is a very twisted, darkly funny horror novel about womanhood and perimenopause. I was ready when I picked this up for a wild ride. Nat Cassidy's most recent release, When the Wolf Comes Home, is one of my favorite horror novels of all time. I knew going into that this could not come close. Nothing can. And I was right. But this still delivered a wild time. Nat Cassidy is truly a master of his craft, of the horror genre, blending grotesque imagery, a lot of humor, and some really horrifying moments that kept me glued to the page. That being said, this book is a lot, and I mean maximalist. There is so much shoved into this thing. We're covering perimenopause, hallucination, ghosts or furies, serial killers, Greek mythology, there's dark comedy, there's despicable ants, there's gore, there's insects, the list goes on. We maybe spent a little bit too long in Mary's self-loathing interiority, and there were some parts that really dragged in the middle, and there were a few parts that kind of dragged. I kind of wanted it to move a little faster in the middle, maybe skim off some of Mary's introspection and like get to the next horrific twist. But the last third or so is just bananas. It is gory, it is inventive, it is shocking. And I think the humor really does balance the horror quite well. It's original, it's unflinching, it's unforgettable. For me, the impact of this novel did not quite hold a candle to When the Wolf Comes Home, but nothing can. And ultimately, I'm still very impressed with this author and what he has to say. And the fact that this really largely tackles the female experience is kind of impressive. If you like horror that's messy, smart, and occasionally ridiculous, definitely check out Mary. That's everything I read in January, February, and March of 2026. So far, it's been a really interesting reading year, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Let me know in the comments, what are your top books of the year so far? These are definitely mine. As always, thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to chat more books with you soon. It's too loud to record 'cause of the dump trucks.